The world you are about to enter is not one of war or glory. It is one of paper, silence, and slow-moving seasons where time is marked by the falling of cherry blossoms and the scratching of a brush on paper. You are in the Heian period of Japan, roughly around the year 1000 CE. In the capital of Heian-era, modern-day Kyoto, the imperial court hums softly with poetry, protocol, and the faint rustle of silk robes. Among the many ladies of the court, one woman lives quietly in the margins. Her name, later remembered as Murasaki Shikibu, is not even her real name. We do not know what that was. What survives is the pen name derived from her most famous character and her father's title. And what also survives miraculously, stubbornly, is her ink-stained legacy. Let us begin with her quiet life before the court. A daughter of dusty books. Murasaki was born around 973 CE, the daughter of Fujiwara no Tamatoki, a low-ranking nobleman and scholar. Her mother, like many women of her time, goes unnamed in the records. This was not unusual. Women's names were often omitted from official documents, as though their lives flowed beneath the surface of history, felt but unseen. Her father held a post as a provincial governor, and so her early years were likely spent not in the imperial capital, but in the countryside, quiet, remote, and cold. Unlike many girls of her time, Murasaki was educated. She was taught Chinese, which was then considered the formal language of the court and government. This was not encouraged for women. It was seen as improper, but her father, it is said, lamented that she had not been born a boy. If only she were a man, he is believed to have said, she would have been a great scholar. It was a compliment, perhaps, and yet a prison. Even in praise, her world was limited. By the age of 20, Murasaki could read and write Chinese, compose Japanese poetry in waka form, and had likely read much of the Chinese literary canon available in Japan at the time. But there was no university for her, no career in government, no scholarly society to join. There was only the private world of women, cloistered behind screens and robes, where beauty, sensitivity, and discretion were the greatest currencies. Still, she wrote, in private by lamplight, with sleeves brushing against paper. A marriage and a loss. Murasaki was married in her mid-20s to Fujiwara no Nobutaka, a distant relative and government official. She bore a daughter, Kenshi. Her husband died soon after, possibly of disease, a common fate in a time without medical understanding or hygiene. There is little emotion recorded about this event in her diary, the Murasaki Shikibu Nikki. The tone remains distant, reserved. This was not coldness, but training. Heian court culture valued restraint. Emotions were meant to be hinted at, not displayed. Now a widow, Murasaki returned to a life of quiet contemplation. Her daughter would later become a lady-in-waiting herself. But for Murasaki, this time of mourning opened the space for something else. She began writing a fictional narrative, a tale unlike any that had been attempted before. The tale begins. It began as small stories passed between ladies of the court, a kind of entertainment among the well-educated. But her tale grew in scope. It developed complex characters, intricate psychology, and emotional resonance. The protagonist, Hikaru Genji, was beautiful, melancholic, and deeply flawed. He moved through the world of the court not as a hero, but as a man trapped by beauty, expectation, and sorrow. What Murasaki was crafting was not just a story. It was what would become the Tale of Genji, often considered the world's first psychological novel. But at the time, it was not a grand literary project. It was simply something to do, a quiet act of rebellion through fiction. Her manuscript would circulate among the noblewomen, copied by hand, word of mouth and brushstroke. Life in the inner chambers. When Murasaki was eventually invited to serve Empress Shoshi at court, she found herself immersed in a world both dazzling and tedious. The inner chambers of the imperial palace were richly adorned, filled with poetry competitions, incense blending contests, and the endless tasks of court life. Arranging flowers, choosing appropriate seasonal colors for robes, composing verses for official events. It was beautiful and stifling. Men and women rarely spoke face to face. Courtship was conducted through layers of screens, through poetry and perfumes. Identity itself was obscured. People were known by titles, ranks, and poetic allusions rather than names. This environment was the perfect incubator for the tale of Genji. It was also, for Murasaki, emotionally isolating. She observed, judged, and recorded everything. In her diary, she comments on the superficiality of the other ladies, their vanity, their obsession with appearances. But she also admits her own struggles, her shyness, her awkwardness in social settings, her distaste for small talk. And always she wrote, "The silence of paper." The Heian period valued stillness. It was a culture of watching, listening, and not saying too much. Paper, especially high-quality paper dyed in seasonal colors, was a precious object. Writing was a spiritual practice, not a functional one. Murasaki would have spent hours preparing her inkstone, grinding the ink with water, choosing just the right brush. Her robes, heavy with layers, would brush against the tatami. Outside, perhaps, the snow would fall in silence. This was not a time of speed or urgency. Days passed slowly, with rituals tied to nature. The changing seasons, the phases of the moon, the blooming of flowers. Time was not mechanical, it was poetic. In this slowness, Murasaki built her story, sentence by sentence, episode by episode, with no publisher, no editor, and no audience beyond a few noblewomen, and yet her words endured. The question of authorship. Some scholars believe that the Tale of Genji was not written entirely by Murasaki. It may have been added to by other writers, extended by fans or court scribes. Authorship in Heian Japan was a fluid concept. There was no copyright, no single point of origin. And yet her name survives, or at least the name given to her by history. Murasaki Shikibu. But who was she really? A noblewoman, a widow, a reluctant court lady, a genius in hiding? Or simply a woman who saw too clearly, wrote too well, and lived in a world that was not quite ready for her? As the winter deepened and her ink froze in the mornings, one can imagine Murasaki sitting by the dim light of an oil lamp, sleeves tucked back, composing the next sorrowful chapter of Genji's life. She was not a revolutionary. She was not loud. She simply endured, and in doing so, she left behind something irreplaceable. But what was it like to live day to day in that cloistered, rule-bound court? What routines shaped her hours, and what unspoken rules governed her every movement? You wake before dawn. The cold air of the palace presses through the shutters. It is not yet time to rise, and yet the rhythm of the Heian court does not forgive late risers. The robes you must wear today have already been selected by your attendant 5, sometimes 6 layers, depending on the season, each carefully chosen for its harmony with the month and the shifting weather. Color combinations are not merely aesthetic. They are political, symbolic, and deeply scrutinized. This is the world in which Murasaki Shikibu lived out her days at court. It was not a life of freedom or intellectual exploration. It was a life of constant observation, both giving and receiving. The year is 1006. Murasaki has been appointed as a lady-in-waiting to Empress Shoshi, daughter of the powerful Fujiwara no Michinaga. He is not just a nobleman, he is the power behind the throne, and it is he who likely arranged for Murasaki's appointment. Her literary reputation, already quietly growing from the whispered passages of Genji, has reached him. And now she is here. The palace, a place of light and confinement. Heian-era's imperial palace is immense. Its architecture is designed to impress but also to separate. Women live in the kakyu, the inner palace, an area that men, even emperors, cannot freely enter. These rooms are dim, shadowed by curtains and screens. Communication is often carried out through intermediaries. Direct speech is rare and intimate. Murasaki's days are spent in half-light, her vision obscured by latticework and paper screens. In this place, A woman must be graceful at all times: her walk, her voice, her writing. Any deviation from courtly perfection could damage one's standing. The wrong tone of voice, the wrong poem at the wrong time, a sleeve out of place. The pressure is relentless. And yet the mind wanders, and so she writes. Rituals of the everyday. A day at court was governed by rituals, morning prayers, seasonal observances, poetry exchanges, tea offerings, scented sachets prepared with precise blends of incense. Murasaki records in her diary the tedium of these routines, but she also notes the way they gave structure to an otherwise aimless existence. She often writes in the third person about herself, using detachment as a kind of armor. She found the constant talk tiresome. Their remarks about each other petty. She withdrew quietly. These moments are telling. They speak of her discomfort. Court life is not the intellectual paradise one might imagine. It is theatrical, hierarchical, and often absurd. Ladies compare the quality of each other's handwriting with great seriousness. One's choice of words in a poem could determine favor or disgrace. And in all this, Murasaki is an outsider, a widow, a woman who reads Chinese. She is not quite like the others, and she knows it. The language of power. In Heian Japan, Chinese was the language of men used in official records, diplomatic affairs, and religious texts. Women, by contrast, wrote in kana, the phonetic script of the Japanese language. Kana was seen as informal, less prestigious. But this distinction gave rise to something unexpected. Because women were not bound by the formalities of Chinese prose, they developed a literary culture of their own. Diaries, poems, letters, and stories flowed from their brushes. The very limits imposed on them became a creative force. Murasaki navigated both worlds. In her diary, she references Chinese classics. Her deep understanding of history, Confucian ethics, and Buddhist philosophy quietly shapes the Tale of Genji, even if its form is resolutely feminine. This dual fluency sets her apart, but it also isolates her. She once writes of another woman at court, say Shanagan, author of the Pillow Book. Though they likely served different empresses, Murasaki's disdain is evident. She is clever, but her heart is shallow. Was this professional rivalry, jealousy, or perhaps a subtle critique of a different kind of courtly woman, one who thrived in the very world Murasaki found hollow? Whatever the reason, Murasaki's tone is unmistakably distant. The Empress and the Mirror. Serving Empress Shoshi was both an honor and a burden. The Empress, young and still learning the art of court life, needed guidance in etiquette, correspondence, and style. Murasaki became not only an attendant but also a tutor, a woman of letters teaching another how to be seen, admired, and remembered. And yet, Shoshi's presence was often more symbolic than personal. The Empress's role was to be admired, not understood, to sit behind curtains and let others interpret her expressions. Even Murasaki, close as she was, refers to her with restraint. It is telling that in the Tale of Genji, women are often depicted as reflections obscured, watching from shadows, waiting. Genji himself moves through this world not as a conqueror, but as a man forever haunted by the unknowable nature of the women he pursues. Perhaps this is the truth Murasaki understood too well. The seasons write themselves. Seasons mattered in Heian life, not just because of the weather, but because they governed everything: robe colors, court rituals, poetry themes, and even emotional expression. In spring, one was expected to compose melancholic poems about cherry blossoms. In autumn, verses of longing and transience. A failure to match one's mood with the season was a failure of taste. This aesthetic sensitivity permeated every corner of court life. Even letters were scented with seasonal perfumes: plum for spring, clove for winter. Murasaki's diary often records these details with almost obsessive care. The precise hue of a robe lining, the timing of the moonrise, the way light filtered through bamboo. Why did these details matter so much? Because in a world where you could not speak freely, gesture broadly, or act without consequence, the only safe forms of expression were quiet ones. A line of poetry, a shade of green, the scent of a letter. These were her tools. Loneliness beneath the glamour. Despite the luxury of her surroundings, Murasaki writes repeatedly of loneliness. She is often ill. She dislikes the noise of the other women. She feels detached from the world around her. Even her role as a celebrated writer does not bring joy. She writes in her diary, "The moon is bright tonight, but I do not feel like looking at it." Simple, devastating, and profoundly human. This was not a woman basking in her fame. This was a woman surviving the only way she knew how, by observing, recording, and withdrawing. The weight of expectation. As the tale of Genji grew in popularity, expectations mounted. Nobles requested new chapters. Court gossip revolved around her writing. And yet, Murasaki was not paid, not honored officially, not recognized by title. Women could not publish. They could not claim authorship. They could only write in silence. Imagine, then, the pressure of crafting the inner lives of dozens of fictional characters while simultaneously concealing your own. Imagine writing about love, death, obsession, and betrayal only to have your name omitted from history. Yet she wrote on, episode by episode, chapter by chapter, 40 in total, with the last likely completed by someone else after her death. An unseen community. Though isolated, Murasaki was not entirely alone. She existed in a quiet network of other writing women, Sei Shonagon, Izumi Shikibu, Akazome Iman. Each left behind diaries or poetry. Each grappled with love, reputation, and grief. These women were not rebels. They did not call for revolution, but through their ink, they carved out small spaces of truth. In a world that preferred women to be seen and not heard, they listened and then whispered back in elegant script. And their words outlived the empires they served. A life folding inward. In time, Murasaki began to withdraw from court. She became increasingly reclusive. Her diary entries grew fewer. Her daughter matured, and her place in the court began to fade. She may have become a Buddhist nun in her later years, a common choice for women seeking solace or escape. We do not know when she died. Records suggest sometime between 1014 and 1025. She would have been in her 40s or 50s, a respectable age in a time of frequent illness and limited medicine. There was no public funeral, no monument. Her story, like so many women's stories, simply stopped. But what do we make of this ending? Is it defeat or peace? Did she find in the shadows of her retreat a sense of freedom? Did she regret her work, or take comfort in knowing that her words still moved among courtiers, whispered in candlelight? And most of all, how did she see herself? As a writer, a servant, a failure, a witness. In the dim candlelight of the imperial palace, surrounded by hushed voices and the rustling of silk robes, a woman continued to write. Brush in hand, sleeve drawn back, she moved her ink slowly across the paper. The world outside was shifting. Emperors died, ministers rose and fell, rebellion stirred in distant provinces. But inside her quarters, time stilled. This is where we return to Murasaki Shikibu in the final years of her life. At her writing desk, composing sorrowful scenes for characters who existed only in the confines of her imagination, yet somehow lived more richly than many of the people around her. She likely did not know it, but the Tale of Genji would become one of the most important works in world literature. Her name, though fictionalized, would be spoken 1,000 years later, but to her, in those moments, it was just ink, just paper, just silence. Let us step now into the final arc of her story. The later chapters, a tale of melancholy and decline. As the Tale of Genji reached its later chapters, something in the tone shifted. The early chapters had focused on Hikaru Genji himself, a brilliant, beautiful man navigating love and duty in the refined world of the Heian court. His romances, his regrets, his ambitions all delicately sketched by Murasaki's hand. But Genji dies midway through the tale. The remaining chapters, known as the Uji chapters, follow his descendants and unrelated characters. The tone becomes more austere, more introspective. Gone is the luminous glamour of court life. What remains is isolation, longing, and the painful passage of time. Many scholars believe these chapters reflect Murasaki's own state of mind in her later years. She had lived through court politics, lost her husband, possibly lost her daughter, and withdrawn into spiritual contemplation. Her writing became more fatalistic, more Buddhist in its awareness of impermanence mujo. There is a scene near the end of the tale where a character writes, "The flowing river never stops, and yet the water is never the same." It is a borrowed metaphor, ancient even in her time, but in her hands, it becomes something deeper, a reflection of transience, of loss, of the inevitable vanishing of all things. Buddhism and the path of retreat. In the Heian period, it was common for noblewomen, especially those widowed or disillusioned, to take Buddhist vows in later life. This did not necessarily mean retreating to a mountain monastery. Often, it simply meant cutting one's hair, adopting the robe of a lay nun, and withdrawing emotionally from worldly affairs. There are signs that Murasaki may have done just that. Her diary ceases. The literary references in Genji become more overtly Buddhist. The sorrow in her writing deepens, not with bitterness, but with quiet resignation. This religious turn was not a rejection of life, but a reframing of it. In Buddhist thought, beauty itself is impermanent, and because it is impermanent, it is precious. This principle, mano no aware, becomes a central emotional thread in the tale of Genji. Through the lens of Buddhism, Murasaki's retreat was not an ending, but a transformation. The legacy of a name she never chose. We call her Murasaki Shikibu, but that name is a modern construction. Murasaki comes from a character in her novel, a woman of refined elegance and tragic destiny, beloved by Genji. Naming the author after one of her fictional creations is both homage and erasure. Her real name was never recorded. This was the norm for women in her time. Shikibu refers to her father's position in the Ministry of Ceremonial Affairs, Shikibu Sho. In other words, her public name is a combination of her father's job and her own fictional character. In a way, this encapsulates everything about her life: anonymity, artifice, and brilliance hidden behind a screen. But perhaps she would not have minded. In Heian Japan, it was considered vulgar to name someone directly. Identity was meant to be glimpsed, not seized. Her true self, like the characters in her novel, was meant to remain just out of reach. The tale spreads, from scrolls to centuries. The tale of Genji did not end with her. After her death, the story continued to circulate. Ladies-in-waiting and scribes hand-copied each chapter, adding illustrations, commentaries, and embellishments. Some scholars believe that the final chapters may have been completed or edited by others. The line between author and scribe was porous. In the centuries that followed, Genji became a fixture of aristocratic education. Emperors read it. Courtiers quoted it. Artists painted its scenes on silk screens, fans, and folding scrolls. Eventually, it crossed oceans, translated into French, English, German, and found new audiences in lands Murasaki could never have imagined. By the 20th century, it was being studied as the world's first psychological novel, and Murasaki as one of the earliest female novelists in recorded history. But in her lifetime, there were no accolades, no publishing deal, no applause, only the faint sound of brush against paper in a quiet room. Survival through stillness. Murasaki did not shout her way into history, she whispered. Her survival, both literal and literary, was rooted in stillness. She understood how to observe, how to outlast, how to write from within the margins. This is not the kind of history usually celebrated. There are no battles here, no revolutions, no manifestos, only the slow burn of a life lived behind curtains, recorded in careful strokes of black ink. And yet she endured. In many ways, the tale of Genji is a story of survival, not of triumph. Its characters struggle with change, disappointment, and the gradual erosion of youth. They fail to communicate. They cling to moments that are already gone. Perhaps this is why her story still resonates. It is not the tale of a heroine who overcame adversity in grand fashion. It is the tale of a woman who wrote, and in writing, left behind a map of emotional truth. How history remembers. Today, Murasaki Shikibu's legacy lives on in museums, literature courses, and quiet studies across the world. A crater on Mercury is named after her. Kyoto's Murasaki Shikibu Park includes a statue of her, eyes downcast, brush in hand. In Japan, her image appears on currency and postage stamps. But perhaps the most moving tribute is in the continued reading of her work. Each time a student opens the tale of Genji, Murasaki's voice speaks again softly, patiently, from across a millennium. It is tempting to imagine her reaction to this fame. Would she be pleased, amused, uncomfortable? Or would she simply return to her inkstone, dip her brush, and continue writing? Reflection, the quiet power of invisible lives. What does Murasaki Shikibu teach us? Not just about literature, or courtly life, or Heian aesthetics, but about the value of quiet observation, about the power of surviving in a world that does not know what to make of you, about finding your voice in the margins of history. In many ways, she represents the countless women whose names we will never know, who wrote, created, or dreamed, but whose lives were not recorded. Her tale is boring, yes. It is filled with details about robe colors, seasonal incense, poetic conventions, and rigid etiquette. And yet, within those boring details is the shape of a life complex, lonely, enduring. She reminds us that even the most ink-stained, invisible stories can outlast empires. And so we leave her there, behind her screen, beside her lamp, sleeves rolled back, brush in hand. You wake to the soft creak of a paper screen sliding open. A pale morning light filters through the reed blinds. Somewhere nearby, a servant strikes a small bell. Another day has begun in Heian-era, the imperial capital of Japan, around the year 995 CE. But this is not the court of glittering robes and perfume-scented poetry. This is the world beneath that beauty, the world of bureaucrats. Paper, not power, rules your life. A world of ledgers and protocols. You are a minor scribe shoshi in the Ministry of Taxation, one of the many offices that make up the imperial bureaucracy. Your desk is a simple wooden plank, your tools a brush, inkstone, and a steadily growing stack of dispatches from the provinces. Your job: to record the number of rice bales shipped from the province of Oweri, to tally the misdeliveries of silk tribute from Iyo, to write letters chastising village headmen for submitting reports in the wrong ink color. It must be black, always black. You are not famous, you are not powerful, no one will write poetry about your life, but the court cannot function without you, and you know it. The Bamboo Office. The ministry building called Shazerio is located near the southeast edge of the palace grounds, past the major halls but still within the inner enclosure of the Daijokan, the Great Council of State. The walls are made of lacquered wood, the roof of baked clay tiles. Outside, the court's bamboo groves rustle in the wind, a sound like dry paper whispering secrets. Inside, however, is not so poetic. It smells of old parchment and mold. Mice scurry behind scroll racks. Dust clings to silk dividers. Each morning, the junior clerks sweep it away, part of the unspoken duties of life in the lower bureaucracy. There are no salaries here, at least not reliable ones. Payment is in stipends of rice or cloth. Many junior clerks, including yourself, depend on family support or minor inheritances to survive. You are, in every sense, a paper servant. A day in the life. Your day begins before sunrise. After ritual purification, washing your face and hands, you don a simple court robe, unlined, dark blue. Rank dictates color, and yours places you low on the scale. You enter the office and begin the daily copying of documents. Reports must be transcribed in triplicate, one for the archives, one for the receiving ministry, and one for palace records. Mistakes are costly. A miswritten kanji can delay communication between court and province for weeks. You receive a letter from the province of Echigo. The snow has blocked roads. The grain tax will be late. You record this in the annual logistics ledger, noting the date, the official seal, and the courier's name. No one thanks you. At mid-morning, you receive tea, green and thin, bitter. You sip in silence, listening to your superiors bicker over the phrasing of a letter to the Bureau of Divination. Something about the misreading of a lunar omen. You sigh and return to your brush. Bureaucracy as survival. The Heian court may be remembered for its poetry, its elegance, its tales of love and longing, but beneath that veneer was an immense, meticulous bureaucracy. Every robe worn at a ceremony was recorded. Every piece of tribute was noted. Every death, birth, marriage, and appointment was copied, filed, and sent across the country by a network of foot messengers and horseback couriers. And behind it all were men like you. Men who never appeared in diaries, men who never wrote poetry, men whose names are lost to history but whose handwriting, flawless, precise, recorded the empire's every heartbeat. Your handwriting, in fact, is the only proof you exist. You take pride in it. You've practiced the strokes since childhood, perfecting the elegant curve of Rise-Ho script, the flow of Sosho. Sometimes, when no one is watching, you write poetry lines in the margins of dispatches, just for yourself. Politics at the paper's edge. You are not entirely invisible. Your superiors play subtle games, delaying approvals, hiding dispatches, bribing couriers, all to advance their clan's standing or curry favor with higher ministries. Even the clerks are players in this quiet battle of influence. A colleague is demoted after a shipment of rice is accidentally recorded under the wrong noble house. You suspect he was set up, but you say nothing. Silence here is often the safest move. You learn to survive by being meticulous, predictable, invisible. And yet, invisibility is exhausting. The language of form. One of your most important duties is maintaining Jyoji, the formal structure of imperial documents. Each document has its own format, depending on who it's going to, who it's from, and the purpose. If you use the wrong phrasing, it's returned. If you forget a seal, it's rejected. If you write a year according to the wrong imperial era, it's burned. You know all 19 possible formats by heart. Sometimes in your dreams, you see them floating in the dark rectangles of black ink and crimson seals, endless scrolls unrolling forever. Even your dreams are made of paper. The emperor's absence. In theory, the emperor governs all. In practice, he rarely leaves the inner palace. His days are spent reading poetry, composing verses, listening to flute recitals. He is young, guarded by eunuchs and ladies-in-waiting. You've never seen him. His policies are decided by regents, usually of the Fujiwara clan, who rule in his name. But even they rely on the ministries. One misplaced scroll can ruin a promotion. One miscopied edict can change a tax policy. You understand this. It's your quiet power. You think often of writing something more meaningful. Not a story like that woman in the Empress's chambers, but a record, a true diary of how the court actually runs. The mold, the mice, the lies. But no one would read it, and if they did, you would vanish. The Festival of Cranes. In late autumn, the Ministry of Ceremonial Affairs requests your help with an unusual task. A local official has gifted the emperor 2 cranes from the north, rare and symbolic. You are asked to tally the costs of transporting them to the palace, feeding them, and constructing an enclosure. You spend 3 days tracking every expense: straw mats, fish, a new bronze basin, a gift for the crane keeper. You note that the bamboo for the enclosure has been improperly filed under military supplies. You correct it quietly. No one thanks you, but the cranes arrive safely and the emperor is said to have smiled. This, you think, is enough. A pause for reflection. At year's end, the ministry's slow. The winter cold seeps through the floorboards. You wrap your hands in cloth and continue copying reports. The ink thickens in the cold. Sometimes you wonder if anyone will remember this work. The emperor will be remembered, the poets will be remembered, the generals, the noblewomen, the lovers and exiles. But what about the men who filed the rice reports, who counted cranes, who corrected seals? What about the invisible? The year turns. A new lunar calendar begins. A fresh stack of scrolls arrives from the province of Mutsu. You unroll the first. Your brush trembles slightly from the cold, but your handwriting remains perfect. Another year has begun. But what happens when the system begins to crack? When famine hits? When records are falsified and no one notices? What happens when the clerks begin to stop caring? What happens to an empire held together by paper? You return to your desk on the second day of the new year. The decorations, pine branches and plum blossoms, still cling to the doorways of the palace buildings. There is incense in the air, and somewhere, a flute plays the opening notes of a seasonal prelude. But here, inside the Ministry of Taxation, there is only dust. Dust on ledgers, dust on robes, dust in the folds of old dispatches. You pick up your brush. When systems creak. The Heian bureaucracy was never built for speed. It was built for harmony. Like the poetry of the court, it relied on elegance, subtlety, and established patterns. Every action followed a prescribed form, every letter a ritual. But now something is shifting. Rumors ripple through the lower ranks. In the provinces of Dazefu and Bizen, tax shipments have gone missing. In the north, rice deliveries are down by half. There are whispers of corrupt provincial governors selling off land or pocketing tribute before it reaches the capital. In theory, such offenses are punishable by removal from office or exile. But punishment requires paperwork, and paperwork depends on bureaucrats like you. And so, the burden falls on the silent ones. The clerk's dilemma. A courier from Mutsu arrives, frostbitten and pale. He hands over a scroll from the northern administrator, sealed hastily with wax. You break the seal, unroll the document, and begin reading. The numbers don't match. The official report claims 30,000 bundles of rice collected, but last month's ledger showed 42,000. You cross-reference 3 previous shipments. The shortfall is consistent. Someone has been quietly siphoning the surplus for at least 6 months. You bring this to your superior, an aging scribe with ink stains on his sleeves and eyes that have long stopped caring. He skims the report, sighs, and says, "Fix it, make the numbers match. No one wants a scandal." So you do. You adjust the totals. You amend the ledgers. You falsify a letter attributing the discrepancy to snow damage and unpredictable flooding, and you stamp it with the provincial seal. It is technically illegal. But everyone around you does it. Everyone knows. No one says a word. The bureaucracy of survival. In the Heian court, truth is not absolute. It is flexible, ceremonial. Reality exists as much in form as in fact. If the document is sealed properly and uses the right phrases, then it is accepted. What matters is not whether the shipment arrived, but whether it was recorded correctly. This creates a strange paradox. The more fragile the real empire becomes, the more solid the paper empire must appear. The cracks in the system are patched over with perfect handwriting. You are not alone in this. In the Ministry of Rights, a clerk records a funeral for a nobleman who died 2 years ago but was never officially declared deceased. In the Bureau of Imperial Horses, a scribe invents the weight of a horse that never existed, just to justify an expenditure on oats. You laugh with him over tea. It's a bitter laugh, dry. What are you really preserving? Paper empires. The archives stretch back centuries. Rooms of scrolls, tied with silk cords, labeled in fatting calligraphy. Some contain census records from villages that no longer exist. Others list decrees from emperors whose names have faded into obscurity. You walk the archive hall sometimes in the late afternoon, when the sunlight slants through the high windows and casts long shadows on the floorboards. Each scroll represents someone's life, a farmer's debt, a monk's exemption from taxes, a village's request for flood relief. And yet none of these people are remembered, only the scrolls remain. You wonder, are we preserving history or burying it beneath layers of ink? A moment of disruption. One day, the assistant governor of the province of Harima arrives at the capital, unexpectedly and without formal introduction. He demands an audience with the ministry. He brings with him 3 witnesses, village elders who claim that their tax shipments have been seized en route by bandits who were, in fact, hired by a rival noble house. It's a scandal if true. You are asked to handle the documents. You do carefully. You draft a neutral report, phrased in vague terms: irregularities, possible misrouting, unconfirmed hearsay. You ensure that no specific noble house is named. You suggest a delay in judgment until further investigation. The witnesses are sent home, quietly. The assistant governor receives a silk robe as a gift for his service to the court. The matter ends there. No one is surprised. Everyone nods. This is how it works. But something in you bends, not breaks, not yet. Just bends. The scent of paper, the weight of years. There is a kind of fatigue that seeps into the bones, not from labor, but from watching truth lose its shape over time. You begin to write poems again secretly. You do not sign them. You leave them tucked into blank ledger books, little fragments. I counted cranes, and they vanished into ink. Only the numbers remain. You doubt anyone will read them, but the act of writing soothes the dissonance. You wonder what it might be like to live honestly in this world, to write down what truly happens without fear, but that would be dangerous, not just for you, for everyone above you. So you whisper your truth into poetry, into silence. The woman in the garden. One evening you pass the inner court gardens. You see a woman seated alone beneath a willow, writing. She is famous now, or so you've heard, the author of Genji. You've never spoken to her, but her presence carries weight. You pause, unsure whether to bow or continue walking. She glances at you just briefly, then returns to her writing. You walk on. Later, in your own quarters, you wonder, does she feel the same fatigue? The same sense that the world is hollow at the core, dressed in silk but filled with silence? Perhaps, perhaps not. She writes fiction. You write facts that are fiction. Which is closer to the truth? The question of collapse. You are not the only one noticing the cracks. The Ministry of Military Affairs is behind on its reports. The frontier guards have not been paid in 3 months. Grain stores are unaccounted for in 5 provinces. Villages go unregistered. Temples quietly acquire more land than allowed. You copy a scroll from the Bureau of Personnel that lists the same man as both a regional tax collector and a monk with religious exemptions. No one notices or cares. One day, a colleague leans over and says quietly, "If the papers lie, does the empire still exist?" You do not answer, but the question lingers. Time as a circle. The court moves in circles. The year turns. The rituals repeat. You conduct the spring audits, write the same letters with only the dates changed. You prepare the tax summary reports. You approve requests for new paper. You mark time not by events but by the return of familiar documents. Each season folds into the next, and with each repetition, the space between what is written and what is real grows wider. But the paper remains. Your inkstone runs dry one afternoon. As you pour fresh water onto it, you look out the window at the bamboo groves swaying in the wind. You remember your first day at the ministry, the weight of the robes, the nervous excitement, the belief that this work mattered. It still does in a way, but in a different way. Not as truth, but as preservation. Not as justice, but as order. A fragile kind of order held together by ink and fear. But how long can a system survive when its foundations are paper? What happens when even the scribes begin to doubt the words they write? The fire started in the outer market district, not uncommon, not alarming. A cooking flame, some dry thatch, a gust of spring wind. It spread across a few blocks, then leapt the wooden walls of a supply warehouse. But by the time it reached the government district, everything changed. You remember the smell first: burning lacquer, singed parchment, the sour edge of scorched ink. Then the smoke, the thick, gray breath of history turning to ash. And then the shouting. Officials running, servants carrying bundles of scrolls, arms filled with paper, yelling about archives and lost seals. You were in the ministry building when it began, when the walls grew hot, when the dust began to swirl in golden sunlight, lit from behind by flame. You didn't run, not at first. Fire in the archives. The fire reached the Ministry of Taxation by late morning. You were in the document hall, sorting the spring ledger reports, unopened bundles from the provinces of Higo and Tosa. You remember the flickering light outside, the sudden silence. Then someone screamed, "Fire!" from the far corridor. You turned toward the wooden chests containing years of tax scrolls, bound with faded cords, labeled with ink you could barely read. You hesitated. You tried to gather an armful. Too late. The paper went up like dry leaves. All those numbers, all those facts, a year of your life and others, entire existences reduced to smoke within seconds. You covered your face, stumbled through the halls, and emerged into a courtyard filled with ash. Aftermath and ash. The fire was controlled before nightfall. Half the court's administrative wing was lost: ministries, records, registers. The scrolls were not fireproof. The buildings were not stone. The systems were elegant but fragile. The following morning, the emperor remained silent. The Fujiwara regents issued a statement of consolation. The ministries met, exchanging blame and carefully worded apologies. And you began the process of rewriting what had been lost. From memory, rebuilding what never was. This is how it works. You sit at your desk, brush in hand, and begin recreating scrolls. Not transcribing, recreating, because the originals are gone, and no one knows what they said except the handful of men who once read them. You reconstruct a rice shipment from Iyo province. You invent new figures for the tax rolls of Sanuki. You estimate population numbers in Tango. No one questions the numbers. You carefully write in proper form. You affix false dates. You use seals borrowed from other ministries. It is all wrong. And yet it is all right. The system depends on you now, not as a recorder of facts, but as a forger of stability. The fiction of order. This is the moment when you truly understand. The empire is not made of stone, or soldiers, or emperors. It is made of paper and belief. The scrolls create the world they describe. If the scroll says the rice shipment arrived, then it arrived. If the seal is affixed, the event occurred. The truth exists only where it is written. This is not a failure, it is a design. And you, once a passive scribe, are now a silent architect of this fictional order. It terrifies you, and it thrills you. The faces you'll never see again. The fire took the lives of 5 clerks, including a boy you trained only months ago. He had a crooked brush stroke, always too sharp at the corners. He'd finally learned to curve his loops last week. You find a scrap of one of his practice pages in the ash pile near the old document hall. You do not cry. Crying, like most emotions at court, is reserved for ceremonies. Instead, you carry the paper back to your quarters and tuck it into your robe, a reminder of what was lost, not the archives, not the reports, but the people who once kept the empire quietly spinning. The report that was. 3 weeks later, a courier arrives from the province of Oweri with a new scroll. You open it and read. It references a shipment that never existed, a temple payment misdated by a year, a noble house that had no jurisdiction in that province. It's filled with errors, contradictions, and false seals. You take out a blank scroll, you rewrite it, you fix the dates, you correct the names, you forge a new seal using wax from a broken stamp, you send the revised version to the Ministry of Rights. You've become what you once feared, a custodian of a past that never happened. But you sleep well that night, for the first time in weeks. Because the lie now is the truth. A visit to the Willow Grove. In early summer, you return to the Willow Grove outside the Empress's garden, the place where, months ago, you saw the woman with the brush. She is not there. Perhaps she is gone, or perhaps she too has retreated into the spaces behind curtains and screens. But the willows remain. Their branches hang low, green, and soft in the humid air. You sit there for a while, listening to the cicadas, feeling the weight of your robe in the heat. You do not write. You simply remember. The end of the year. Autumn arrives, quiet and gold. The ministries have stabilized. New scrolls fill the shelves. The Ministry of Justice investigates no one. Promotions are granted. Rice continues to flow. The emperor writes a poem about chrysanthemums and wind. And you are still here. Still copying, still amending, still ensuring the empire appears as it should, balanced, graceful, eternal. You begin to understand what your real duty has been all along. To keep the illusion alive. A final thought. One evening, as you prepare a report on temple land grants, you pause. You look at your brush, still wet with ink. You think of the cranes you once counted, of the archive that burned, of the ledger pages that now contain ghosts and guesses. And you ask yourself, if no one remembers the truth, but the lie endures, what becomes of history? The year is 742 CE, during the height of the Tang dynasty in imperial China. Chang'an, the capital, is bursting with color, trade, and poetry. Foreign merchants crowd the western market. Buddhist monks walk quietly through the temple courtyards. Aristocrats pass through the city gates in lacquered carts, their banners fluttering in the breeze. But you will see none of that. Because you are already awake, long before the city stirs, long before the rooster crows. You are a household servant in the home of a mid-level Confucian official, and this is your world. Not the halls of poetry and power, but the kitchen hearth, the broom, the water basin, the endless cycle of invisible labor that keeps the wheels of empire turning. The unseen class. Your name is never written down in the family genealogies. Your birthdays pass unmarked. You eat after the others, sleep on the floor, and rise before the sun. But the household would crumble without you. You were not born into slavery, but close. Your family owed a debt one too large to pay, so you were sold into bonded labor at age 11. You remember your first day here, the weight of your linen tunic, the smell of dried fish, the terror of not knowing the rules. Now at 22, you are part of the furniture, trusted if not acknowledged. The day begins in ash. Your morning begins in the charcoal room. The embers must be coaxed back to life before anyone else rises. You kneel on the clay floor, blowing gently into the ash-covered coals. Your breath catches the embers. The fire flickers. You feed it with splinters of pine. Soon it's alive again. You carry a clay pot of water to the stove. Boil it. Pour some into bowls for washing. Set the rest aside for kanji. You work in silence. By the time the master's daughters are awake, their water is already warm. Their robes have been aired, their combs laid out. They do not see you, but everything they touch passes first through your hands. Rules written in dust. The household follows the teachings of Confucius. This means hierarchy. Everyone has a place. Everyone must know their role. Your master is a minor official in the Bureau of Rights, educated, always quoting from the Analects. His word is law inside the home. His wife, a strong-willed woman from a respected family, manages the internal affairs. You answer to her. There are 5 other servants in the house, 2 cooks, a gardener, an errand boy, and an old woman who cares for the children. Each has their domain. Crossing lines is dangerous. Not in violence, punishment is rare, but in quiet shame. A look, a missed meal, a whisper that you've forgotten your place. Confucianism teaches order, but for you, that order is heavy. The work behind the meal. Food is central in Tang households, not for its luxury, but for what it signifies. The master dines facing east. His sons eat at the second table, you and the others, behind the screen, always. You rise before dawn to soak rice, slice radish, prepare fish paste. Every piece of meat is precious, measured, stretched. Even the peelings are used for soup, for the pig, for something. Waste is shameful. One day, the youngest daughter leaves her duck egg untouched. You save it quietly, and later that night, you boil it and eat it alone in the kitchen. The salt stings your tongue, but the taste is rich. It feels like a secret. Letters and the brush. Your master insists on literacy for his sons. He hires a tutor. You pass the schoolroom daily as you carry tea and ink stones. You listen through the lattice window. The master said, "A gentleman is modest in speech but exceeds in action." You whisper the words to yourself as you scrub the garden tiles. Eventually, you begin tracing characters in spilled water. You know you'll never go to school, but the brush strokes comfort you. One night, alone in the storeroom, you write a poem on a scrap of old cloth. Charcoal stains my hands, yet the ink flows smooth as silk. Who will read these lines? You hide it under the firewood. No one sees. But it exists, and that matters. Illness and the herb woman. In late spring, one of the younger sons falls ill, fever, chills, coughing. The household turns frantic. Boiled herbs, prayers to the ancestors, a visit from the herb woman. You are asked to stay up and tend the stove through the night, to keep the water hot, to fetch the mixtures of licorice root, cinnamon twig, dried ginger. You do not sleep for 2 days. When the boy recovers, you are not thanked, but a fresh steamed bun appears on your bedding the next morning. From the old nursemaid, perhaps. You eat it slowly, savoring every bite. Small kindnesses survive even in rigid hierarchies. The world beyond the gate. Once a month, you are sent to the Western market to purchase supplies. This is your only glimpse of the wider world. The streets are crowded: Persian traders, Uyghur mercenaries, Buddhist monks, Taoist priests. The smells overwhelm: sesame oil, camphor, dried shrimp, roasted chestnut. You keep your eyes low. You have no silver of your own. You trade on behalf of the household. Still, the city stirs something in you, a reminder that there are lives beyond the compound walls. You pass a storyteller in the plaza, reciting tales of court intrigue and ghosts. You linger just for a moment, then move on. Back to the house, back to the charcoal. Reflection: what is obedience worth? You are loyal. You do your work well. You understand the rhythms of the household better than some of the family members themselves. You know which daughter secretly adds sugar to her porridge, which son hides his brush to avoid writing. You know their lives intimately, and yet you are separate always. Sometimes in the quietest hours, you ask yourself, if I vanished tomorrow, would they even know my full name? You suspect not, but the question lingers, and so does your story. In the second section, we will explore what happens when this structured life is interrupted by unexpected guests, rumors of rebellion, and a sudden illness that changes the balance of power in the household. Because even the smallest shift in hierarchy can crack the Confucian order. The rules of your world are fixed. The father commands, the mother manages, the sons study, and you the servant serve. There is no confusion about roles, no illusions. The Confucian order is not a suggestion. It is cosmic structure, a moral geometry said to reflect the harmony of heaven itself. And yet, one small disturbance, barely a tremor, can make that entire structure shake. That disturbance came the week the master's brother arrived from Luoyang. A guest with no warning. He was not expected. No scroll had arrived ahead to announce his journey. No servant preceded him. Just a knock on the gate at dusk, and there he was, tall, thin, dressed in travel-worn robes with a jade token dangling at his belt. He called himself Uncle Yu, though he did not smile when he said it. Your mistress, startled, welcomed him with the proper courtesies. A room was prepared, tea boiled, mats arranged, but behind the screen the household buzzed like a disturbed hive. The guest who does not sleep. Uncle Yu did not act like other guests. He asked questions, too many, about the household accounts, about the staffing, about which son showed promise, about why the tax registry scrolls were still on the shelf. Shouldn't those have been delivered to the magistrate's courier by now? He visited the garden early in the mornings, sat in the study with your master in long, quiet conversations. He did not eat much. He watched everything. You were tasked with bringing him tea. One day, as you placed the tray beside him, he looked up and said, You've been here a while." You nodded. Speech was not expected. "Do you know what loyalty means?" You nodded again, unsure if it was a question or a warning. He said nothing more. Illness in the master's chambers. On the 6th day after Uncle Yu's arrival, the master fell ill. It began as a cough, then fever. By evening, he could not rise. The household shifted, overnight duties reassigned, voices lowered, faces drawn. Your mistress moved like a ghost, managing without emotion. She issued orders quickly, clearly, her tone steely but tired. You were told to sleep outside the master's room, to fetch hot towels, to carry herbal mixtures, to wake the doctor if the fever returned. It did on the 3rd night. Power behind the screens. With the master bedridden, the household became an unspoken battlefield. Uncle Yu remained calm, but his presence thickened. He took charge of letters. He received the magistrate's courier himself. He corrected the youngest son's brushstrokes. Once, he even stood at the front gate and sent away a messenger with a mere glance. Your mistress did not confront him, but her hands trembled more. She consulted the book of rites late into the night. She double-checked the servants' rosters. Everyone knew, when a man falls ill, power does not wait. It moves, and often silently. A missing ledger. It was you who noticed it first. The spring ledger scroll, the one recording the rice payments from local tenant farmers, had vanished from its usual shelf. You asked the older cook, then the errand boy. No one had moved it. That evening, you saw Uncle Yu slip into the study with a scroll case under his arm. You said nothing, but you knew. The next morning, he requested ink and fresh parchment. He did not ask the household steward. He asked you. "You have neat hands," he said. "Copy this for me, line for line." He handed you the missing ledger. Your throat tightened. The scroll was filled with subtle adjustments farmers added or removed, tribute amounts increased. The seals were smudged. You copied it perfectly, just as instructed. You did not ask why. A Confucian dilemma. You grew up hearing the teachings of Confucius recited at village rituals. To know what is right and not do it is the worst cowardice. But now, what is right? Is it obedience to your role serving the household, doing as you're told, ensuring harmony? Or is it justice protecting the master's interests, preserving the truth, even if it means disobedience? You are a servant, you are not meant to choose, and yet every action you take is a choice. You think of the old lines. When the great way is abandoned, there are rights and duty. You wonder, have we already abandoned the great way? The master awakens. After nearly a week, the master's fever broke. He was weak but alert. He asked for rice water, then his writing brush, then finally for the ledger scroll. You were in the courtyard when the shouting began. Voices raised, the sound of something heavy dropped on the floor, your mistress crying out. Uncle Yu's calm tone, unshaken, replying in clipped phrases. The next day, Uncle Yu left without fanfare. No farewell dinner, no carriage from the magistrate. He disappeared like a shadow at noon. The household breathed again. But something had changed. The aftermath. The master recovered slowly. He returned to his duties but said little. His son studied harder. His wife spoke more softly. The scroll shelves were reorganized. The household shrine was cleaned with care. You were never questioned about the ledger. No one mentioned your role in its copying, but your duties changed. You were asked to assist in the study more often, trusted with more than tea. Perhaps they knew, perhaps not. But in a world ruled by ritual, small shifts carry deep meaning. A servant's honor. One night long after the house had quieted, you sat beside the hearth, the fire down to embers. You took out a new piece of scrap cloth. You dipped your brush and wrote. Loyal hands stained in ink. Who will judge them when the fire burns the records clean? You folded the poem into the seam of your robe. Not to hide it, just to carry it. Because memory, not scrolls, is the only true record for people like you. In the next section, we will see how disaster natural, not political, shakes the household. A flood in the district threatens everything, and the family must decide whom to save and what to let go. But when survival is at stake, how does a servant keep dignity and which traditions must be broken? It began with rain. A slow, steady drizzle in early summer. Then it thickened into sheets, rolling off the tiled roof like oil. The courtyard ponds overflowed. Water pooled at the stone steps. The ground turned to sludge. By the fifth day, you could no longer see the garden paths. Bamboo leaned like old men in the wind. Frogs croaked in the halls at night, and the servants, yourself included, were bailing water from the granary, barefoot and soaked. This was flood season, always expected, never welcomed. But this year, it would test the foundations of not just the house, but the very order it stood upon. A crack in the earth. Chang'an sat between two rivers. During the Tang dynasty, its system of canals, aqueducts, and drainage ditches was the envy of the world. But all systems have limits. This season's rain surpassed them. Word came from the west quarter first. The outer dikes had cracked. Then came news of the nearby fields washed away. Soon after, the road to the market was swallowed by water. Trade halted. Deliveries ceased. The household grew nervous. And in that nervousness, hierarchy began to stretch. The storehouse. Your first duty during the crisis was clear: protect the food. Salted fish, barley sacks, preserved radish, tea leaves, all placed on the upper shelves. The servants rotated in shifts to check for leaks, seal cracks in the clay jars, and remove moisture from the rice bins. But the air was thick with damp rot. Even the charcoal began to mold. One morning, the cook, an elderly man with stiff hands, slipped while lifting a jug of vinegar and fell, breaking 2 ribs. He was sent to his bed with boiled millet and opium bark. You took over his duties. You didn't ask. The family retreats. The master convened a household meeting, a rare event. He spoke softly, still weak from his recent illness. Beside him stood his wife and their oldest son. They declared a retreat. The family would evacuate to a relative's villa on higher ground. The decision was not up for discussion. You were tasked with preparing supplies, folding robes, packing dried goods, boiling water, selecting servants to accompany the family. Only 3 would be taken. You were not on the list. Choosing who stays. The selections were practical. The nursemaid because of the youngest daughter, the errand boy because he knew the roads, the junior cook because she could prepare meals and was young enough to carry bundles. You were told quietly to keep the house secure, to tend the storehouse, to stay until their return. There was no discussion, no thanks. Just expectation. You bowed low. But inside something shifted. Not resentment, not quite. Just a new understanding. You were expendable. The flood comes closer. The next day, water reached the back garden. Lotus pots floated loose. Carp from the pond flapped desperately in the courtyard. Rats scurried into the rafters. You worked without rest, hoisting jars to upper shelves, tying scrolls in oilcloth, wrapping furniture legs in cloth soaked in camphor and vinegar. At night, you slept on a bench in the granary, the smell of rice and mildew thick in your throat. You were not alone. 2 other servants remained. The gardener, old and half-blind, and the woman who once served tea but now mostly wept at night. No one led, no one gave orders. You simply did what needed doing. And in that silence, a strange freedom emerged. A stranger at the gate. On the 4th evening of their absence, someone knocked at the outer gate. You answered, hand on the wooden bar, soaked from head to toe. A man stood there, cloaked, holding a small girl in his arms. He claimed to be from a neighboring household, his employer gone, his house flooded. He asked for shelter. You hesitated. Hospitality was a duty even among servants, but so was caution. Resources were scarce. You thought of the granary, of the few days of food left. You let him in. He bowed. He never asked your name. You never asked his. Life without the family. In the days that followed, something changed. You boiled rice together, repaired doors, cared for the child who had a cough. You used the master's herbs without permission, took blankets from the women's quarters. There was no hierarchy now, no recitations from Confucius, no one watching. Only decisions. One night, as the rain stopped and the moon reflected off the flooded courtyard, the stranger said, "Is this still his house if he's gone?" You didn't answer. Because you didn't know. Return. The family returned after 9 days. The flood had receded, the roads dried, the danger passed. They entered through the front gate with bundles, umbrellas, and their usual grace. They found the house intact, the scrolls dry, the food preserved. The master nodded at you once, no words. The stranger and child were gone by then, quietly left that morning with nothing but a folded bundle of millet and a blanket you placed at the gate. The house resumed its rhythm, but you were no longer the same. The brushstroke that changed. In the days that followed, your duties resumed. You boiled water, cleaned the altar, polished the master, inked stone. But when you copied his correspondence, another task now entrusted to you, you noticed something had changed. Your handwriting was different. Sharper, quieter, more confident. It was as if your fingers had learned something during those flood days, something no ritual had taught you. Not rebellion, not pride, just presence. You were no longer invisible to yourself. A closing thought. Years later, when the master died and his sons dispersed, You would leave the house with a small pouch of coins and 2 linen robes. You would find work in another district, perhaps in a monastery, perhaps in a tea shop. No one would remember the flood. No one would remember the stranger. But you would. And in that memory lived a truth that Confucian order never accounted for. That in disaster, dignity is not given. It is chosen. The library is not the one from legend. It is not marble colonnades and golden scroll racks. It is not fire, at least not yet. And it is not silent. The real library of Alexandria, at least the one you serve in, is cramped and dusty. The scrolls are wrapped in linen against moths. Parchment curls with age. Wooden shelves groan under weight they were never designed to carry. But here you are, an archivist third class. No title, no name on the marble donor plaques, just ink-stained fingers and tired eyes. The year is roughly 150 BCE, and the great library is still standing. But it is no longer new. And neither are you. You work in the second room. Not the main chamber that one is for scholars, wealthy visitors, and foreign dignitaries. That's where the polished Greek philosophers debate, where scribes copy famous manuscripts for royal gifts, where students pretend to read Aristotle while actually watching the daughters of diplomats walk by. You are not allowed in that room unless summoned. Instead, you work in what the staff calls the second room, a long, narrow annex behind a water-stained door. Here is where the damaged scrolls are kept, the miscatalogued, the duplicates from foreign traders that arrive smelling of salt and sand. This is where knowledge goes to be unnoticed. And this is where you spend your life. The dust weighs more than the scrolls. You sweep, not as a janitor but as a conservator. Every day, before handling a single document, you remove the dust with a soft feather brush. You clean the tops of the scroll cases. You inspect for signs of mildew. Dust here is not mere filth. It is the slow death of knowledge. Every flake threatens ink. Every spider thread can trap a fragment of Herodotus, a miscopied line from Pythagoras, or a fragment of an Egyptian land deed, whose scribe is now only remembered in your shelf inventory. So you sweep, you clean, you preserve. No one notices. The work of the forgotten. Most of your day is spent recording shelf movements. The scrolls are sorted by subject: philosophy, mathematics, geography, medicine, ritual texts, tax records. Within each section by language: Greek, Egyptian, Demotic, Aramaic, sometimes Sanskrit or Punic. And within each language by condition. The best copies go to the main hall, the fragile ones to the second room. Sometimes the scrolls are blank on the back. You reuse them, you clean off old wax seals, you copy new titles, you mend tears with fish glue. Every so often, a scholar appears at the door and hands you a damaged scroll with a sneer. See if this can be made legible. Then they leave. You repair it, you write a new tag, you file it away. If they find it again and quote it in a lecture, they'll never mention your hand. But you'll know. A day like any other. On one particular day, hot, airless, and thick with citron oil from the lamps, you are handed a scroll without a title. It is small, tightly wound, its leather case cracking. No wax seal, no author, just a faded label in broken Koine Greek. You gently unroll it. It's a travel journal, possibly Phoenician. The writing is rushed, the grammar uneven, but it describes a port possibly ancient Carthage, though it's unnamed, with a diagram of warehouse placements, trade routes, seasonal wind directions, and a note about coastal tides. You realize slowly that no one has ever read this since it was copied. You re-roll it, tag it, add it to the sea trade unverified section. And for a moment you feel something strange, satisfaction. Not pride, that would be dangerous. Just the quiet thrill of having read something no one else has in centuries. Even if no one will ever know. The politics of placement. The library, like the city itself, is ruled by patronage. Ptolemaic officials control what gets copied. Greek scholars argue over who receives access. Roman diplomats offer bribes for early translations. Egyptian priests lobby to keep certain religious texts from being reinterpreted. And you watch. You see manuscripts placed in prime positions not for quality, but politics. You know that 3 different original versions of Plato are circulating. You know that a shipment of Babylonian astronomy records was misfiled last year and still hasn't resurfaced. You say nothing, because archivists are not asked to speak, only to keep the scrolls clean. A scholar of broken things. The irony is not lost on you. You, who cannot publish, are the most familiar with the flaws of ancient texts. You have seen the missing lines, the worm-chewed corners, the names scribbled over by angry rivals. Once you found a scroll where 2 commentaries, Greek and Egyptian, had been squeezed into opposite ends of the parchment. A silent war of footnotes. You stared at it for an hour before tagging it. Contested origins, leave unclassified. It still sits on your shelf. Sometimes you unroll it just to feel the tension. Rituals of the day. Each morning before unsealing the door, you offer a silent prayer to Thoth, god of scribes and knowledge. No one taught you this. You learned it from the older archivist before he died. He used to tap the scroll case 3 times, bow slightly, then unlock the door. You do the same now. You don't know if it matters, but in a world ruled by dust and forgetfulness, small rituals are how you remember yourself. Questions that no one asks. As the day ends and you roll up the shutters, you sometimes wonder, who wrote these texts you spend your life saving? Did they know their words would end up unread in a back room? If knowledge is never accessed, is it truly preserved? What is the point of safeguarding fragments that will never be studied? And the quiet answer always, because someone must. In the next section, a fire breaks out in the merchant quarter. Panic spreads. Whispers reach the library. You are ordered to secure the second room. But as flames come closer, and the scholars scramble to save the most famous scrolls, a question arises. Which knowledge do you save when you can only carry one? Smoke doesn't arrive as a column, it creeps. The scent is what strikes you first, a bitter mix of char, resin, and burning linen. You notice it when you are sorting through a scroll of Galenic medical commentary. At first, you think the parchment has been singed. Then you hear shouting in the distance. The merchant quarter is on fire. It wouldn't be the first time. Alexandria is a crowded, volatile city. Candles fall, ovens flare, tensions boil over. Usually it is confined, extinguished, forgotten. But this time, the wind is not helping. The order comes down. Just past midday, a runner arrives breathless from the main chamber. His hair is matted with sweat, his robe stained with ink. Second room archivists are to lock and seal all doors. Await further instruction. No removal of materials unless directed. You nod, bow slightly, and shut the scroll in your hands. This is not a drill. And you know what's unspoken in the order. The priority is not your room. The panic in the hallways. You pass through the inner corridors on your way to the rear storage. The hall is loud now. Scholars arguing over scroll provenance. Pages running with stacks of text wrapped hastily in cloth. A young translator is crying because he cannot decide whether to save an original Homeric codex or the only copy of a Phoenician grammar. You are not panicked, not yet. You've spent your life documenting the forgotten. And now, in a twist of irony, the forgotten must be the first to act. You return to the second room and lock the door behind you. Fire is not fast. Contrary to legend, fire does not instantly consume a library. It starts slow, spreads through the outer walls, then catches when it finds wax, parchment, resin, wood. Time slows in those moments. You've read scrolls describing fire, even translated fragments of Heraclitus on its philosophical meaning. None of them prepare you for the smell. And still the scrolls sit in their places, quiet, unknowing, waiting. You remove your robe and begin wrapping the most fragile items in it. Not the well-known ones, not the beautiful ones, but the ones only you understand. What you choose. You have space for perhaps 5 scrolls, 1 arm's worth. You pass by the Aristotle shelf. Everyone else will be saving those. You pass the sealed editions of the Ptolemaic royal decrees. They're inscribed in triplicate elsewhere. You reach instead for the anonymous travel journal from the coast, with its diagram of warehouse windbreaks. The bilingual medical scroll, Egyptian and Greek, the one with contradictory notations. A tattered demotic scroll listing food distribution, ratios during famine. A set of Aramaic stargazing records from a temple in Seleucia. Its dating system doesn't match any known calendar. The scroll with the dual commentaries, the one no one will ever cite. You bundle them, bind them in twine, and press them to your chest. These are not popular scrolls, but they are yours. The door. As you prepare to leave, you pause. The second room has no external exit. You must pass through the main hall, through crowds and chaos, where your scrolls might be taken or cast aside. You hesitate. Then you take one more action. You reach behind the lowest shelf and pull out a small clay jar, a sealed cylinder used for damaged scroll fragments. You place a short note inside. You write, "These are not the famous works. These are the rest. Their survival is not guaranteed. But they are the true archive. If fire takes the names, may the dust still hold the meaning." You seal it. You push it deep into the far wall, into a hollow behind loose stone, where the mortar has crumbled. Then you go. Smoke in the sky. The sky above Alexandria is orange-gray. You pass statues wrapped in soaked linen, scribes carrying water pails, and guards who shout but do not stop you. You blend in. You do not run. You walk steadily with your armload of forgotten scrolls as the library begins to burn behind you. You are not the hero. You are not the scholar who saves Plato. You are not the priest who shields the Book of the Dead. You are not the official who orders the rescue of Caesar's war memoirs. You are not remembered in any account of this day. But you are the one who saved the grain rations of a forgotten village, the wind charts of a sailor, the notes of 2 scholars who disagreed in secret for decades, the texture of knowledge, the things that don't make it into stories except this one. Afterward, weeks later, after the fire is controlled, the library reopens its unburned sections. There is a ceremony, prayers to Serapis, sacrifices made, the scholars rebuild, new scrolls are copied, new shelves ordered. You are not called back to your position. You are told the second room suffered extensive damage and will not be restored. You take a post at a temple archive outside the city. You say nothing, but the scrolls you saved remain with you, stored in a dry clay jar, deep within a wall of reed-packed bricks, protected from light and rot. You do not label them. You just remember. In the next and final section, years later, as an old man tending the temple archive, you are asked to explain why you work so quietly. A young novice questions your methods. And you explain, finally, what an archivist is: not a preserver of fame, but a caretaker of meaning in the dust between greatness. Decades have passed. You are no longer in Alexandria. You now serve at a small temple archive in the hills beyond Hermopolis, where reed beds sway in the breeze and the Nile's flooding is more predictable than politics. Here the air is dry, scrolls survive longer. The collection is modest, mostly agricultural calendars, temple donation logs, and duplicate copies of hymns to Thoth. It is quiet. You live among prayer, pigeons, and parchment. And that is enough. Until one day a boy arrives. The novice. He's no more than 15, sent by the priests for instruction. His name is irrelevant. He speaks Greek, some Demotic, and asks too many questions. He watches as you clean scrolls with crushed reed fibers, as you use fish glue to repair torn bindings, as you arrange documents not by topic or author, but by fragility, handling, and sunlight exposure. He furrows his brow. But shouldn't the most important scrolls be at the top? You shake your head gently. Importance fades, ink fades faster. Explaining the work. You begin to teach him, not with lectures but through movement. You show him how cicada droppings can ruin ink, how papyrus frays near heat, how scribes once reused parchment, scraping old text away with pumice stone. You teach him how knowledge accumulates in layers not only on paper, but in habits. He asks why you separate scrolls in jars with no titles. Because the last time a fire came, it was the jars that survived. Fire. You tell him the story, not with drama, not with heroism. Just the facts. A fire, a choice, 5 scrolls. He listens. His expression is unreadable. What you really saved. One afternoon, he finds the jar. The one you placed behind the bricks. The one with the anonymous Phoenician diagram, the famine record, the dual commentaries. He brings it to you, wrapped in linen. These are strange. Why not catalog them properly? You smile almost. Because they weren't meant to be saved, but I saved them anyway. Why? You pause, then answer. Because they remind me that knowledge isn't always glorious. Sometimes it's just useful, or wrong, or forgotten, but it still matters. He is silent for a long time, then nods, and replaces the jar without another word. Time and its quiet erosion. The scrolls around you begin to fade. Some crumble. Some are eaten by silverfish. Some simply go unread, and that is the slowest death of all. You stop repairing certain texts. You know they won't last another century, so you teach the boy, now a young man, how to copy them. Not to preserve the content exactly, but to preserve the act of preservation, the care, the attention. Every line of ink carries a choice, to forget or to remember. A final ceremony. The temple prepares a ritual for Thoth, god of writing, wisdom, and measurement. You are asked to speak an odd request for a man rarely spoken of. You step forward slowly, robes ink-stained, fingers bent with age. You do not quote great scholars. You do not cite Plato or Ptolemy. You say only, we remember not only what was written, but the ones who kept it dry, wrapped it in cloth, hid it behind bricks. We worship knowledge, but we survive because someone once saved the moldy scroll. Then you step back into the shadows, and no one claps, which is exactly right. The last line. You know your time is ending. You prepare a final note, not a biography, just a few lines on a reed slip. I cleaned more scrolls than I read. I saved more pages than names. If you find this, know. The work is done in silence, and not all heroes are cited. You place it in the same jar. Wrap it, and place it back into the wall. Reflection, what endures? The great library burned in parts many times. It was rebuilt, then lost again. History remembers names Caesar, Hypatia, Euclid, but not the hands that copied, stacked, and dusted. This is the archivist's role. Not to be remembered, but to remember for others, even if no one ever knows you did. The land is flat, so flat that the sky feels too large. The year is 605 CE, during the early years of the Sui dynasty, and the Emperor Yangdi has ordered something unprecedented. A waterway, thousands of li long, stretching from Hangzhou in the south to Luoyang in the north, connecting the fertile grain fields of the Yangtze River with the seats of imperial power. It will be called the Grand Canal, and one day people will say it is the most ambitious engineering project in pre-modern history. But you won't hear that, because you are one of the tens of thousands of men digging it. You are not a planner, not a general, not a celebrated engineer. You are a worker, a conscript, and your life is made of shovel, soil, and silence. The draft notice. It came folded in red paper, pressed with the imperial seal. Your village headman read it aloud, slowly, stumbling over the official phrasing. You had hoped the quota for your region was filled. It was. Your name was the third called. You were 21. Your father gave you his old sandals. Your mother cried but said nothing. Within 3 days, you and a dozen others were marched to the labor camp at Yuhang, where hundreds had already gathered: farmers, fishermen, petty thieves, even former soldiers. None of them knew how to dig a canal. The tools of construction. You expected machines or beasts or something clever. Instead, they gave you a worn wooden shovel, a basket for hauling dirt, a rope belt to tie around your waist when lifting heavy stone, a quota: dig 1 cubic meter per day. If you failed, you were whipped. If you collapsed, someone else took your place. You learned quickly to dig with your knees bent, to load the basket evenly, to keep your back dry because wet cloth led to disease. You also learned not to speak of pain. Everyone was in pain. No one had the time to care. The dust line. The canal was not a narrow ditch, it was a massive earth wound. In places, over 30 meters wide, designed to carry boats, grain, and tax shipments. Each morning you lined up at dawn and marched to your section. You could see other labor crews like ants stretching into the horizon. Overseers walked the line, barking orders, adjusting ropes, measuring progress. The sky was endless, the dirt unending. And yet each day the trench deepened. A system of human beasts. The empire, you were told, was a system. Each part must work in harmony. The emperor sat at the center, the son of heaven, while you were merely a finger, a tendon, a callus. It was strange, then, that the system felt so cruel. You saw men fall from sunstroke, their faces red, then blue, then still. You helped carry one to the shade once. The next day his bedding was gone, his name never mentioned again. You learned not to help too often. Kindness slowed the work. Slowing the work brought punishment. You carved kindness into your evenings, instead quiet gestures. A shared water gourd. A song hummed low. A patch sewn on a neighbor's tunic while he slept. The Bureau of Canal Affairs. Once a tall man in silk robes came to inspect your section. He was from the Canal Affairs office, the overseers of the entire project. He had soft hands and a fan scented with plum oil. He asked questions no one answered. He wrote things on a scroll. He did not stay. But his visit meant something because that week the rice rations improved, slightly. Salted fish appeared in the midday stew. The whippings lessened. For 3 days the overseer spoke more softly. Then he left and things returned to normal. You remembered his face, though, not because of cruelty, but because he looked confused. As if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The mud season. Rain came in waves. The canal flooded. Sections collapsed. You were forced to carry stones up makeshift slopes, your legs caked with slick clay. Leeches attached to your ankles. Frogs nested in your sleeping mat. Tools rotted from the inside out. The overseers shouted louder then. They feared delay more than death. You worked through fever, through infection, through hunger. But somehow, the canal still grew longer. You began to believe it would never end. the conversations that stayed. At night, curled in shared tents, you whispered to each other. One man had seen the Yellow River in flood and lost both parents. Another once worked as a grain counter but forged weights and was conscripted instead of jailed. One old man claimed he had built parts of the Great Wall, though no one believed him. You shared stories not to impress, but to remember you were human. Because during the day, your body became a tool. At night, your voice reminded you it wasn't always that way. The Emperor's Proclamation. One morning, a decree was read aloud. The Son of Heaven decrees that this canal shall bind the rivers and the hearts of the people, from the capital to the south. You wanted to laugh. Instead, you dug. And you thought, if this canal binds hearts, who binds the backs? In the next section, the labor intensifies as the Grand Canal nears its final stages. Disease spreads and rebellion stirs. You begin to see that building the empire's arteries may cost the lives of those who pump its blood. But when revolt whispers through the camps, how do the voiceless decide if they will speak? There were too many names to remember. And so you stopped trying. You remembered voices instead. How one man hummed a low tune while hauling stone. How another cleared his throat 3 times before speaking. The way the older man cursed under his breath every time his shovel struck clay. You remembered calluses, gates, scars. But not names. Too many left, too many died, too many disappeared into the floodplain. You worked through it all. Because no one remembered the builders, only the canal. When the fever came, it began as a tremble in the night. A young man no older than your youngest brother shivered in the corner of the sleeping tent. He wrapped himself in a straw mat and muttered about the sky. The next day his lips were dry, his eyes distant. He vomited water and blood. By evening he was gone. They burned his bedding, gave no burial, said the ground was too soft from the rains. Within 3 days, 6 others were sick. You were moved to a different section, no explanation. But everyone understood there were more men to bring in. Always. The way the earth opens. The canal deepened. Each day, your shovel scraped away clay that hadn't seen sunlight in 1,000 years. Fossils emerged, fish bones, petrified roots, strange dark stones. The earth smelled ancient, sometimes sweet, sometimes sour, sometimes like nothing at all. And every so often it collapsed. Walls would break, men would scream, mud would pull them under like slow, sticky waves. You once saw a man vanish up to his chest in less than 30 seconds. Others tried to pull him free. The overseer screamed for them to stop. It was too late. He was swallowed. They sealed that section with rock. The whisper of revolt. It began with one man refusing his quota. He was tall, quiet, from the western mountains. One morning, he simply dropped his shovel and stood still. The overseer beat him with a bamboo rod. He didn't flinch. The next day, 2 men stopped. Then 5. Then half your section. You kept digging, heart pounding. You had seen what happened to rebels before. But then someone whispered, "They can't replace us all, not this many, not this late." And suddenly, you weren't sure who you feared more, the overseer or the man beside you who was no longer afraid. The overseer breaks. The revolt didn't last long. It wasn't even a revolt, just a pause. But for the overseers, even silence was rebellion. They brought in soldiers. Beatings resumed. One man was tied to a post with his hands behind his back and left for 2 days in the rain. Another was sent away in a cart and never seen again. But something had changed. The overseers didn't shout as much after that. Because now they knew they were outnumbered. A grain shipment delayed. The canal was already functioning in places. Barges moved along the finished segments loaded with grain for the northern capitals, tax collections, salt. One shipment, you were told, went missing, robbed by soldiers, or redirected by a provincial governor. No one knew the truth, but the result was clear: no rations for a week. You dug anyway, on empty stomachs, with dry mouths. Someone tried to boil weeds. Someone else caught a bird and roasted it on a shovel blade. You kept going, because to stop would mean more than death. It would mean abandonment. And that's what you feared most. Why you stayed. You think of your village sometimes. Your mother's face. The cracked wall of your family hut. The old tree stump where you used to sit after planting. You don't know if she's alive. You don't know if the land still belongs to your family. The empire reclaims what it needs, especially now, with the canal draining labor and grain from every corner. But you don't leave. Not because you're loyal. Not because you believe in the emperor. But because this canal is the only thing you have left that is real. It deepens every day, it moves forward, stone by stone. Even if the men around you vanish into it. An imperial visit. One day the rumor spreads, the emperor himself is coming. Not to your section, of course, but nearby, to see the progress, to ride the new barge, to survey his legacy. The canal is cleaned. Brush cleared, workers ordered to smile, a decorative arch erected over the embankment. You're told to keep digging, but within view of the visiting entourage. So you do. You glance up once and see a distant figure, shaded by an ornate canopy, surrounded by silk-robed men and umbrella bearers. He points, laughs. You feel nothing, except the weight of the shovel in your hands. A thought at dusk. That evening, after the camp quiets, you sit beside the canal and watch the water. It is still, reflective. You think we are moving the rivers, redirecting them, bending them to our will. But even rivers resist eventually. In the next and final section, the canal nears completion, but you are not there to see it celebrated. You are injured, dismissed, and sent home to a village you barely recognize. And yet what stays with you is not the wound, but the shape of the water you moved and the lives buried beneath it. The injury wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no crushed limb, no flash of steel. Just a misstep on a slick stone and a twist of your leg, a sharp pain that traveled to your spine, then the slow, shameful fall into the mud. You didn't scream, but you couldn't stand. The men near you paused, looked down, and hesitated. One finally lifted you under the arms. Another retrieved your shovel. A third said nothing, just pressed a piece of dried fish into your hand before returning to the work. They carried you back to the edge of the camp, to the sick tent. You didn't know it yet, but that would be your final day digging. The discharge. They didn't keep you long. Too many others needed space, too many worse off than you. A week later, a cart arrived. A conscription officer tossed you a folded paper marked with the imperial seal and a half-mumbled phrase. Released, not needed. You had to squint to read the lines. It didn't say honored or completed or even survived. Just injured, removed from duty. No pension. No fanfare. Just a cart and a driver who asked where your village was. You almost couldn't remember. The return. You had left as a lean young man with calloused hands and clear eyes. You returned as something else. Older, maybe, though the calendar disagreed. Worn, certainly, though not just in the body. Quieter, yes, that too. The village hadn't changed much. A few more children, a collapsed roof, the same goat tied to the same fig tree. But no one recognized you at first. It wasn't until your mother, now nearly blind, stepped into the sunlit yard and tilted her head that she whispered your name. Then came silence. Then came soup. What you didn't say. People asked about the canal. You told them the basics. That it was long. That the water moved. That boats now floated from the south to the north. You didn't tell them about the sickness, or the punishments, or the faces swallowed by the mud. You didn't tell them about the man who sang while dying, or the one who drank from the trench water and smiled anyway, or the quiet moment you realized your hands would never be clean again. You let them imagine it was glorious, because they needed it to be. What you carried. You had no money, no official commendation, no relic, but tucked in your shirt was a small folded scrap, a corner of a map that had been discarded, coated in clay and torn at the edges. It showed one segment of the canal, not your section, but close. You had taken it when the overseer dropped it. Not as theft, but as proof. Proof that something vast had once depended on your small, dirty hands. What the canal became. Years later, merchants passed through your village. They talked of the canal with awe. The barges now reach the capital in half the time. Rice shipments flow smoother than ever. The emperor's wisdom has tamed the rivers. They spoke of stone locks and grain surpluses and prosperity. No one mentioned the builders. You didn't expect them to. But sometimes, when the wind blew from the east, you imagined it carrying whispers songs hummed low by tired men, still echoing across water. An unmarked grave. One spring, after a season of planting, you took a journey. Back to the canal, not to the exact place, but as near as your legs would allow. You sat by the embankment, watched a barge pass. The pilot waved. You did not wave back. You removed a small wooden charm from your belt, a token given by a friend long gone, and placed it under a stone by the water's edge. No ceremony, no prayer. Just a memory anchored in mud. This is not for the emperor, you said aloud. This is for the hands that were never counted. A reflection in the canal. As you stood to leave, you saw your reflection in the water. Older now, lined bent, but still holding something. Not just the memory of labor, but the knowledge that even forgotten work leaves a mark. The canal didn't remember your name, but it carried your sweat. It bore your silence. It flowed because of you. And that was enough. Final thought, what lasts? Stone erodes. Records burn. Names are lost. But systems endure. The Grand Canal still carries grain today. Still connects provinces. Still fuels trade. And yet the men who built it, most are gone. Unnamed, unmourned. And that is the lesson. Greatness is built on backs too bent to stand in its shadow. But in every stretch of water, in every stone channel they remain. Not as statues, but as the current. You wake before the sun, in the cold stillness of the Semian mountains. It is the 9th century and you are a monk of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, cloistered high above the salt roads and valleys where merchants move like ants beneath the cliffs. The monastery, carved into rock, does not rise above the earth it retreats into it. It was made to be unseen, unremarkable, unbothered. Your day begins in silence, not as a vow, but as a way of life. The rock-hewn world. The world around you is not built of wood or marble, but basalt-cooled lava, chiseled and shaped by hands centuries older than your own. The church has no steeple. Instead, it plunges downward. The only entrance is a narrow path known only to the villagers and the initiated. The entrance is marked by a simple notch in the stone. You learned, after many bruises and missteps, to follow the curve of the mountain, not the wind. Inside, the light is dim. The air smells of wax, old parchment, and damp stone. Here, the world is reduced to 3 elements. Prayer, salt, scripture. Salt, the hidden lifeblood. Once a month, your order receives salt slabs brought by donkey from the Danakil Depression, across scorching desert. The monks do not trade gold. You trade knowledge, translated texts, herbal cures, ritual ink, binding materials, and copied psalms. Salt is currency, sustenance, and offering. The laypeople come in silence and leave with grains wrapped in palm leaf bundles. Salt is used to preserve meat, cure wounds, and line sacred tombs. You understand why the ancient Giez texts refer to salt as white fire. It preserves the soul as much as the flesh. A day in the monastery. Your days are slow but structured. Before sunrise, you tend to the goats and sweep the narrow ledges. You collect dew in cracked bowls to save water. Morning. Scripture copying. You sit hunched in the scriptorium, a shallow alcove lit by a polished bronze mirror reflecting sunlight through a shaft. Your pen is a sharpened reed. Your ink is made from soot, water, and gum Arabic. Your writing in Giez is measured and precise. Midday. You eat a flat bread, a few spoonfuls of lentils, a salted fig if the season allows. Afternoon. Prayer, silence, tending to the sick if any arrive, grinding herbs, preparing salves. Evening. More writing, binding, sewing loose leaves, reading by oil lamp. Then sleep on a mat with the cold stone beneath you. The sound of the past. Some nights, the wind in the mountains sounds like chanting. You've learned to distinguish voices from echoes. When you first arrived, you thought the mountain itself sang psalms. Now you know better. It's the memory of prayer, bouncing from ledge to ledge, held in the hollows of the cliffs. You wonder if one day your voice will be among them. The forgotten saints. The history of your order is not kept in libraries, but in the oral chains passed from monk to monk, older to younger. You know of Abun Aragawi, who came from Syria to found the monastic tradition, of Tekel Haymanot, who stood on one leg for 7 years in penance, of the monks who hid ancient relics during the Aksumite Wars, burying them in stone urns near Lalibela. None of these saints are known outside the highlands, but here they are closer than kings. Your job is not to glorify them, but to remember them, even if no one else does. Visitors from below. Once in a while, a traveler appears. A priest from the lowlands, a merchant seeking healing, a pilgrim with questions. They speak of shifting alliances, of wars along the Red Sea coast, of invaders from across the water, Arabs, Persians, even Franks. They say the city of Aksum is crumbling, that the empire has grown weak, that gold is more precious now than scripture. You listen, and then you return to your writing, because your duty is not to the empire, but to eternity. The secret within the walls. There is a room within the monastery, known only to the elder scribes. You are not yet permitted to enter, but you've heard whispers that it contains the Kebra Nagast, the great text of kingship and divine lineage, that it holds fragments of Solomon's teachings, brought by Queen Magda herself, that it hides a salt-preserved scroll written in gold leaf, wrapped in lion's skin, only to be read when the end of days draws near. You wonder, will you ever be old enough, worthy enough to see it? Or is the secret itself the lesson? The fading ink. You return to your chamber one evening and find one of your older copies has begun to fade. The ink thinned, the parchment blotched. You panic, but the elder monk smiles. The word must be copied again, child. What fades must be reborn through your hand. And so you begin again, stroke by careful stroke, because survival isn't about permanence. It's about repetition. In the next section, we follow the monks as they face external pressure, religious disputes, environmental threats, and the slow erosion of their order's memory. As change creeps up the mountain paths, the monks must decide what can be forgotten and what must be preserved, even in silence. The mountain does not move, but the world below shifts like sand. You begin to notice the change first in the travelers, those who come up the paths winded and nervous, speaking with more haste than reverence. Then in the questions they ask. Do you hide books here? Has the ark been seen? What side do you take in the heresy? These are not pilgrims. These are scouts of a world beginning to fracture. The division of belief. In the valleys below, religious tension simmers. The unity of the Ethiopian church begins to splinter under pressure from foreign traders and internal factions. Whispers of Miaphysite versus Chalcedonian doctrine creep into your quiet mountain world. You copy a passage from the Book of Enoch, then pause. A young novice beside you mutters, "Some say Enoch is heretical now." You look at him, blinking slowly. "Enoch speaks with angels," you say. "Anyone who listens is blessed to hear." But you note the fear in his voice, the doubt. Even here in the stone, ideas from the outside are finding their cracks. The eroding edges. The weather changes. Rains become sudden, fierce. More than once you awaken to find stone steps slick and treacherous, runoff flooding the tiny terraces where herbs grow. The roof above the scriptorium, a simple woven lattice, collapses under a sudden hailstorm. You and two others pull the soaked scrolls into a corner, praying aloud as ink begins to bleed across sacred lines. Later, you spend days scraping and salvaging. The pages are reborn, but they carry new scars. The merchant from the east. One afternoon, a man appears with a red-dyed robe and a silver ring set with turquoise. He claims to be from the land beyond the salt flats, where the sun is closer to the earth. He offers paper smooth and pliable, foreign. He offers dyes you've never seen: saffron gold, indigo from a place called Sind. He speaks of ships larger than any you've imagined, carrying men who write in unfamiliar scripts and drink tea from porcelain. He speaks of libraries made from baked brick, not stone. He asks if your monastery has maps. You say no. He leaves with a polite bow, but his eyes linger on your shelves. You begin to wonder how long your world can remain invisible. The loss of a master. One morning, Abasayan, your mentor, does not rise. You find him in his sleeping corner, face turned toward the carved wall, hands clasped around a thin reed pen. The candle has burned out. He is smiling. No great funeral is held, just a quiet burial on the northern slope, wrapped in woven cloth and lined with a single palm leaf inscribed with Psalm 90. The next day, you are handed the bronze mirror used to direct sunlight into the scriptorium. You do not want it, but you accept it. You are now the eldest scribe. The silence between pages. You begin noticing what has been left out of the old copies. Mentions of foreign kings that no longer exist, trade routes that dried up, saints whose names were erased from memory after the wars in Aksum. One manuscript ends mid-sentence, as if the copyist had been interrupted and never returned. You don't correct these gaps. You preserve them. Because absence is a kind of truth, too. A stranger in the library. It happens quietly. One evening, you return from the water path and find a stranger inside the library, a boy no older than 15, dressed like a shepherd. He holds a book upside down. He looks at you with fear. "I wanted to see where the word sleeps," he says. You do not punish him, you do not shout. You hand him a stool and place a small book in his lap, a worn copy of the Book of Jubilees. "Here," you say. "The word doesn't sleep, but it can be whispered." He visits again once a month. One day he will take your place. You can see it in his eyes. The message from below. A sealed scroll arrives, carried by a horseman with a military cloak and a red sash. It bears the sigil of a southern ruler, recently converted to a foreign creed. The message is brief. All texts deemed apocryphal must be surrendered to local authorities. Compliance ensures peace. Non-compliance will be seen as subversion. You read the words aloud to the council of monks. No one speaks. Then the oldest among you simply says, "Then we copy faster." You work until your fingers bleed. Because if memory must be erased, you will give it 10 more versions to chase. The hidden caves. You remember stories of hidden places, caves behind the monastery, only reachable by rope and prayer. You lead 2 scribes there at dawn, carrying a sack of newly bound scrolls. Each contains a version of texts now forbidden: Enoch, Jubilees, apocryphal psalms, ancient herbals. Inside, the cave breathes cool air. You stack the scrolls in a hollow wrapped in bark, sealed with wax and a prayer. Let the future judge, let the stone remember. You do not tell the other monks where it is, because you know some among you are growing afraid. A final entry. In your copyist's journal, you write a single line. When salt loses its taste, it is cast aside. But when memory fades, it must be copied. Again and again. You close the book. Extinguish the lamp. The mountain still stands. But now you know it will not stand forever. In the final section, the monks must make their greatest decision when the world changes beyond recognition. Do you leave your sanctuary to preserve your faith, or remain and vanish with it? And how does one measure faith not in words, but in what is saved when all else is lost? It was the 3rd moon of the dry season, when the dust arrived before the soldiers. From the northern path, the one less used, a thin haze trailed along the mountain's flank. At first, you mistook it for early rain or the stirring of goats, but by midday, the sound of metal boots on stone cracked through the canyon. There were 6 of them. Uniforms unfamiliar, faces shielded, weapons drawn not in anger but in purpose. They came not for violence, but for compliance. The list. The captain produced a scroll, stamped, signed, sealed. He unrolled it across your altar. "We are to collect prohibited texts," he said, "as per imperial decree. Apocrypha, heresy, non-canon. These must be surrendered." You asked him, "How do you define canon?" He did not answer. Instead, he gestured to the shelves behind you lined with centuries of devotion, stone-bound memory, and ink written in candlelight. "These," he said, "are no longer part of the faith." You knew then what you had long feared. Your church was now the ghost of a decision made elsewhere. What was given? You offered what could be spared. Copies of Psalms, Gospels translated thrice, lessons in herbal healing and astronomy written in soft lines meant for children and villagers. The men gathered them without comment. They did not recognize value, only volume. They left as quietly as they came, satisfied with the haul, unaware they had taken echoes, not voices. What they did not take, hidden in the salt caverns, would endure. At least for now. What remained? After the soldiers, silence deepened. Not the comfortable silence of prayer, but one tinged with hesitation. A young monk asked, "If they return, will we resist?" Another, older and weary, replied, "This is not our war." But you wondered, if not yours, then whose? Because what you guarded was no longer simply memory. It was contraband. Ink became danger, pages became rebellion. The word once shelter was now a weapon, even if you never meant it to be. The council decision. The elders gathered under the moonlight, beneath the stone arch that marked the monastery's founding. 3 proposals were offered. Scatter the order. Send monks to lowland villages to teach in secret. Seal the monastery. Hide all that remained and vanish into ritual isolation. leave entirely carry the most sacred texts to Lalibela, where whispers said resistance had formed among the rock-hewn churches. You argued for the second. Let memory sleep in stone. Let future hands unearth it. It was voted, agreed. You would remain, but you would prepare for disappearance. The final manuscript. You chose one scroll to be your last. Not the Gospels, not Enoch, not even the Kebra-Nagast. You chose a list of names. All the monks who had lived in the monastery since its founding. Each copyd preserved, checked against marginalia, corrected where faded. Names with no faces, lives with no tombs. It was not doctrine. It was remembrance. You wrote them slowly. And when you finished, you pressed your own name at the end not in ink, but as a single fingerprint marked in soot. Let it be known, you whispered, that we existed. The salt burial. In the quiet before dawn, you and 2 others hiked to the cave. You carried 5 scrolls wrapped in cloth, 1 vial of oil, a handful of salt. You sealed the scrolls in a stone urn, poured the oil atop, lined the edges with salt to keep insects away, then pressed the rock closed. You did not mark it. You left no symbol. Only a pile of ordinary stones, indistinguishable from the mountain around it. Because what is sacred must sometimes be hidden so well that even you forget where it lies. The final bell. A week later, the bell rope snapped. It had been worn for generations, woven from flax and goat hair. No one had thought to replace it. You took that as a sign. You gathered the novices, now fewer than 10. You taught them not to write faster, but to write wiser. Not to preserve every word, but to know which ones mattered. You burned the damaged scrolls, not in rage, but in release. Ashes do not betray secrets. Years later, you are old now. Your fingers stiff. Your eyes blurred. But still you write. Each morning you trace a single character in dust, then wipe it clean. Practice without permanence. You dream of rain, of goats, of salt slabs balanced on donkeys' backs. You never saw the soldiers again. You do not know if your scrolls were found. But you no longer fear forgetting. Because you've come to understand. It is not the memory that survives. It is the effort to remember.